Hello and welcome to this video, and this is the the meeting of the Patreons, part 2. And in this meeting, we are going to discuss the future of jazz. We have a special guest with us, Ben MAKINEN, who is not only a great, fantastic jazz drummer, but is also a documentary filmmaker on the subject of jazz. He's been on the channel before, if you want to go and check out my interview with him. We've also got a number of patrons in as well. I won't go through them all, but they may. Well, what I want to do today, patrons, is I want to sort of sit back and have a little bit of a skive. Do you know the word skive? It's an English word. So I'm going to have a little bit of a skive, and I want you to take over a little bit more. I don't want to hog it. I'm already hogging it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Ben, and Ben will kick off with his thoughts on the future of jazz, and then you can chip in. Okay?
Wow. All right on. Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me. And nice to meet all of you patrons. The future, well, of course, there is going to be a future of jazz, and it is starting now. The seeds for the future, of course, are now. What will it look like? What will it sound like? I'm not sure that there's ever been a time in history when we've been able to hear and recognize it as it's happening. There's a great quote by Sidney Bechet, the old New Orleans clarinetist, who talked about when he was playing the music, people didn't know how to dance to it. They didn't know what it was. They'd never heard anything like it. It took a minute or two for what Sidney Bechet was doing way back then, to catch on. But he said, but people got it and they figured it out, and the rest is history. So it may not be likely that any experts are going to be able to put their thumb on what the future of jazz is. It'll most likely be appealing to very young people. It'll be happening among the younger people. That's typically what happens. However, I think it's very interesting. I was just listening to a recording earlier this week by Pharoah Sanders with one of your own English composers, Sam Shepard. I think that's called The Promise. Really beautiful, very soothing, almost like a classical composition over which Pharoah Sanders was playing. What my point is, I do think it's very interesting to keep an ear to the elders of the recognized, jazz tradition. And as they get towards the end of their lives, who are they recording with, and what are they doing musically? The ones that still have some chops together, the guys that aren't being rolled out in wheelchairs, bless their hearts. But I think like Miles Davis in the 90s, when he was with his, for lack of a better word, the Electric Band, the Marcus Miller group, they were kicking it high volume, right? Almost like stadium rock jazz. And there's frail, old Miles Davis, frail, vulnerable, but a wizened man, a man of immense melodic beauty and poignancy. And so amidst all of this, intense fusiony, jazz, Miles was bringing us to what I think one of the things jazz can do, which is this the sublime beauty, the poignancy, the notes, the phrase, the melodies that just stop you in your tracks and strip away the ego, and we become part of a bigger. Anyway, I'm waxing poetic, but I do think that even though the future of jazz is happening with young people in ways that we may not recognize and may not like, if you have a sensibility towards whatever your flavor of jazz is now, most likely that's not what's going to be happening. Although, of course, there's at least two different sides to the future. There's the unrecognized part, the innovative part, and of course, everything that we love, all the genres we love of jazz will continue. the young people keep rediscovering the 1950s jazz. There's people that love the swing jazz of the 40s. There's huge swing dancers that need that 1930s and 40s swing music. So there'll be people regurgitating that stuff and doing it well and doing it passionately. I don't want to rip on them too hard. They do it because they love it, or maybe because there's a financial edge for them, playing for swing dancers. But the point is there'll be a lot of well-intentioned people pushing the traditional forms of jazz. And that's good because Andy and I spoke about the fusion of basically the 70s and 80s. Pick a fusion band, any band, it didn't matter. For a lot of people, that was the gateway into discovering Ornette Coleman. Most people don't just roll out of bed in their teens and start digging Ornette Coleman and Coltrane Transcendent. So a lot of the future of the people who continue performing the traditional, we might call the traditional aspects of jazz, will actually be doing a favor, because their own peers will be able to connect with them and thereby get back into the kind of jazz that might inform their more contemporary tendencies, if you will. So I think I've discovered in the current film I'm editing, We Are Here, Women in Jazz, I've come across a lot of women and some men. I feature men in the film too. The film goes into a lot of what is masculine and feminine energy on stage, but there's some people in my film who I think will be doing great things. They're already doing great things musically, and we know historically what that means. I mean, you take improvisation. How do you get away from swing? You play eighth notes. You put swing with eighth notes and some improvisation, and you either amplify it ridiculously loud, and then come full circle back and get into incredibly acoustic. So there's some formulaic ways in which people can go about reconstructing jazz. But I think what's going on, it's got to connect to the people. It's got to have a social relevancy. And I think as some of us older guys, I'm looking at the thumbnails. There's one kind of young looking dude there with the glasses. Most of us, I can't generalize too much. I don't know if any of you have young kids, but the younger generation, they think about things and talk about things differently. It's always been that way. So when you go out to a club and hear them playing, they might be saying things or doing things musically that are really connecting with their peers, and they might strike us as whatever, as awkward, or maybe we missed the message. But I think that's one indication, is that when you get bands who have 20-year-olds packing the place to hear what they're doing, that means something of relevance is going on within that generation. And those will be the people that feed the music. That someone like Melanie Charles, I mentioned her last time with Andy when we spoke. Melanie Charles is doing amazing things on stage with, excuse me, with sampling, with like a little DJ table. She can sample loops, change the timing. She's sampling some Nina Simone or some Sarah Vaughan, and using a lyrical phrase and twisting it and digitizing it to introduce her story, her lyric. And her lyric may be speaking, as I said, to something going on. For example, Melanie Charles, she's a Black woman, so she was talking about some issues surrounding the way Black women are portrayed in the public media, or the way that they're treated on the street. So she'll use an old standard jazz, twist it, bring in her own message, and then her band is just ridiculously smoking. They know the genre, they know the idiom, they know the history, but they're playing their break beats, their metric modulations. They're changing it up in a very organic way, where I saw them at the Blue Note in New York City, and I looked around me, and people are just they're in the palm of her hand on this journey that has the freshness of what it might have been like to have been around when Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker were popping the lid on things, or when the fusion movement hit. Wayne Shorter, Weather Report, Return to Forever, Al Di Meola, these guys, Jean-Luc Ponty. So,
well, I'm actually sat in the set of the Al Di Meola cover from Casino. If you have a look, I've got a fern over here, right? I've got a little roulette table here.
Really?
Those covers on those Al Di Meola albums, they always make me laugh. Ben, you've
So,
I'm going to
so
sort of
oh, you know what, Andy, I've got to say one more thing. I've been thinking about this. Okay, the other part about the future of jazz is a little scary and concerning. AI. The AI tools will actually do two things. They will, in the same way the drum machine and looping studio effects actually temporarily put some people out of work, but ended up really inspiring musicians. Drummers started imitating what programmers were doing and took their chops to another level. I think AI is going to do some really freaky, Slonimsky meets, whatever. They're going to do melodically some weird things, unusual things that we may not think of doing, and it's going to inspire musicians to go in those directions. On the other hand, though, I think we're gonna get deep fakes. We're gonna get a lot of deep fake music because it's free, it's easy. You just type in, excuse me, the prompts, your mood, your genre, maybe throw in some lyrics. These AI programs will. Right now, it's not sounding so realistic to me. The tone generators they're using aren't high, but it's going to get there. And what I wonder is if right now coffee chains like Starbucks. I was flying internationally for a while, and you go into a Starbucks in the airport, and they've got this, damn them, they've got a really slick music track of all the great jazz from the 1940s through the 60s, and there's a vibe, and you feel like, but they're paying royalties on that, right? AI right now is copyright free. Right now, I don't believe anyone can copyright or has to worry about copyrights using AI generated music. So as long as that loophole stays open, I think people, filmmakers, anyone who uses music in public can start to get free music that they only have to pay for the subscription to the AI generators or to some savvy kid who's programming the AI.
Yeah.
But just like cryptocurrency and the internet, anything that's free and liberating at first is going to get shut down, regulated, repackaged, and because right now I don't know how the film industry and the recording rights in England, I don't know what you call them. We call them the PROs, performing rights organizations.
Where we have PRS and MCPS and
those guys. I mean, if movies and television stop paying royalties because they're using AI music, someone's going to say no, but we got to get some money back. So that's another double-edged sword about the future of jazz.
Well, I'm trying to retain, because I think what you've done there, Benny.
Thing along the AI, Kenny G. Kenny G just came out the other year, maybe a year or two ago, with The Legacy, which was he sampled Stan Getz's sound and introduced the world to melodies Stan Getz never played himself, but maybe would have liked to. And he could play with his sax. Kenny G was sampling Stan Getz's sound and playing it the way he wanted, and then bringing his own Kenny G sax sound. So the deep fake thing is going to take off, and people are going to.
That sounds like the work of Satan. Sounds like the work of Satan to me. I'm pretty sure that I'm not that religious person, but now you've told me that story, it's made me sway much closer towards thinking that if there's no God, at least there's the devil. Because who would come up? Kenny G playing the sound of Stan Getz. Oh.
I mean, Kenny G is the devil, right? So
Sacrilege.
yeah.
But along that point, though,
I keep jumping in,
historically,
Ben. I'm gonna have to jump in here because you've said a number of things, and I want to order them so we can all have a good discussion about it. So the first one was that young people are going to be there and they're going to be doing something. It might be jazz, it might not be jazz, but they're going to be doing it, and we might not get it because of the younger generation. And that younger generation will find audiences, and we see that all the time. You know, tomorrow I'm interviewing Matthew Tavares, who is the founder member of Bad Bad Not Good, and he is also the producer songwriter for Kendrick Lamar, Taylor Swift, Post Malone. He's pushed out 20 million units and run 2 Grammys. But of course, he's a fan of the channel. And so he's come on board. I couldn't believe it. We had a big chat last night. Incredible. But he's going to chat about that whole Bad Bad Not Good, because this is really distills what I see. And I think this interview is going to be really interesting. I've done the Jason Marsalis one, and I think he's really pulled together so many aspects of that sort of conservative jazz sort of revolution that happened in the 1980s. But he was right that since 2000s, it's changed. And bands like Bad Bad Not Good is that type of new band. And it's very interesting how they came out. Young people really liked it. The music industry spotted it. And the next thing, you got Taylor Swift and Kendrick Lamar wanting that sound in popular music. But also, the pushback he had was horrendous. And he's going to explain what that was like amongst the jazz community. And it's that thing that I'm trying to point out. So there's that discussion of young people and what they're doing. Then you're totally right. We could still look at old people, old jazz musicians. We can go look in history and we can sort of look at them and say, oh, that's what Miles was doing that. And that's quite interesting. How would you do that today? Because these musicians are pushing the envelope. And then I was trying to, I had it in my head. Then what did you move on to then? We got AI at the end, which is the big discussion point. And we probably need to do that on a separate video. Another thing you mentioned was fusions. Okay, I remember it now. So firstly, what is wrong with somebody playing in a bebop style very well and people enjoying it? Is that what jazz has now become? And do we accept that is jazz, and these new forms are probably jazz influence, but we just have to let that boil over and become its own thing, right? And also in that fusion area, there are people like Kenny G with his horrible Stan Getz copying whatever he's done, to Stan Getz, in his grave spinning around. But this does bring an audience to jazz, and I'm thinking here in the UK, Robbie Williams, who was in a pop band called Take That. He did sort of Frank Sinatra big band jazz thing, and it brought so many people over to jazz. So that I think those are the areas we can discuss. So shall we kick off, and we'll open it up to everybody? What do we think about what is going on with young people, and whether that is jazz, or should we just let it go and be its own thing and just forget about it? And just we'll have our own conservative jazz and we'll like that, and they'll go off and do something else. Because for me, there's a very strong argument that the whole of hip hop is the natural development out of jazz. But but we don't play.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with that. Actually,
yeah.
I think though it's important we can talk about it. I think it would be enlightening to ask the young people who are doing it what they call it. Because part of me thinks some of them don't care. They just want to make music, and they really don't. Most people they don't care what you call it. And some of them actually resent having it called something anyway, because it's not what they feel, or it puts them in a bag.
Yeah.
If you call someone jazz, suddenly they have the burden of proving themselves and maintaining their jazz membership card or whatever. So I think it would be informative to ask them what it is. And part of it is it doesn't really matter. I mean, the jazz is being integrated. I mean, thank God now saxophone players can back up a rock act and sound and be doing more than just pentatonic, doodly doodlies. They've got their vocabulary is bigger because of jazz. If a jazz guy plays with David Bowie, or does that mean David Bowie's now doing jazz? I don't know, but it kind of doesn't, matter as long as the jazz musicians are doing their thing. All these other people take little parts of it and bring it into their music. I think that's wonderful.
My question is, if that is what is going on, and the innovative part of jazz has actually flown the nest and is actually elsewhere now, and that spirit's still there and you can hear it, and jazz itself has just shut the doors down, and it's like an established art form, and you can play it and you can study it, there's nothing wrong with that, and we just part the ways, now. I think there's a lot of truth in that, but also it does sadden me that somebody coming in and studying jazz can't feel as though they're being innovative and push forward because of gatekeepers. Now, in the industry, the gatekeeping is incredible. I've come across so much gatekeeping, so much control, so much, things being manipulated by outside forces, people involved with it who've got a little bit of purchase on culture because they control this thing. Not necessarily musicians, but they're trying to control the narrative all the time. And I think that is fundamentally, I'm trying to spot that, and I'm trying to poke at it all the time. I'm trying to push it so that, because I work with young people, and I'll tell you a story. When I'm endorsed, my drum company came and said, we want to get all the young people involved in what we're doing. So can you ask them what drummers they're listening to? I said, I can tell you what drummers they're listening to. And I said, what? All the drummers that everybody listens to. John Bonham, Keith Moon, but they're also listed like Tony Williams. And they go, they're not. I said, they actually are. And I had to get the kids come and say, we was on a chat and say, can you tell them what they're listening to? There's a difference between kids are just listening to pop music that aren't musicians, but musicians always find their way. Always, they find their way to a certain place every single time. And when I was chatting to we got 10 minutes of this left. I might have to do another one, I think. So I cannot believe this. That's gone so quick. What was I saying? I was put myself off.
You're saying you were endorsed drummers.
Yeah.
Drummers actually do this.
Matthew Tavares.
Musicians find their way.
I've had a running argument with my youngest daughter because she's into Travis Scott and Kendrick Lamar. She listens to all that. And I go, those guys like what I like. And she goes, no way do they like what you like. Yours is weird music. It's uncool. It's granddad music. Nobody likes that. And then I had him there last night. I said, can you just tell my daughter? And he went, yeah, everybody, all of them, Taylor Swift, all of them are all going to this music that I'm trying to celebrate. So I think this is the young people thing is the thing I want to talk about, and how that's going to pan out, and whether we're all past it and we can't even talk about it. And I don't like the thought of that either. And what's out there. And
I have a young daughter. Well, I have a daughter. She's 21, and I've done a lot of teaching too. I think, and what I see with the young people, it ties in with the whole transgender movement. The young people are really eager to let go of labels. And they're trying to they're making safe spaces, inclusive spaces. They're really enjoying the freedom to like bend and break traditional labels and boxes. So, whether they're talking about their gender or their sexuality. And I think there's a big movement of young people, the same with music, like, as much in the same way they want to celebrate having trans people or any kind of people on stage making the music, they kind of enjoy seeing like their Spotify playlist. They enjoy hearing an amalgamation, an incredible mixture of music. I don't think they're so afraid by labels. When we were kids in high school, you were a rocker or you were a jazzer, I think the young people, and that's where I think why jazz is going to survive wonderfully, because they're going to start integrating global influences, more Indian music, indigenous musics from around the world, foreign languages, different instrumentation. I think kids are going to embrace, and again, they'll probably hate us old guys trying to call it jazz or not jazz, because they're the ones breaking up all of the labels.
Well, what's really interesting to me is I think with that we might have tied it all together, because I think culturally you've put your finger on the thing that I'm trying to pin down. And what it is we're going to an age. If you take AI and we take the young people and we take the old people and how they think about genre and all that, we are moving into a technological space where all our identities will be fluid. All our identities will move. You know, because
We're
you
going
can
to be
be whatever you
avatars.
want to be, and you know
Any avatar you want. Yeah.
yeah, the technology is putting billions into that to happen. You know, Facebook's changed to Meta, and the idea is, I can go online and I can be Charlie Parker and walk around Forties, Bebop, and go and watch him play and watch an AI Charlie Parker play. If I am Charlie Parker, I'll be playing. But all right, so I could be in that. That was good up until then, and then I got all confused. But I could be, couldn't I? I could be Charlie Parker, going to see myself play if I wanted. You see, I'm limiting myself because I'm so old. Everybody could be Charlie Parker.
It's going to be a new video game, Andy. It's you can take on any great jazz character you want and play a 3-person shooting jazz game. And you'll be seeing the music from behind the horn of any guy you want.
So I'd be Charlie Parker with a horn that shoots jazz bullets, and we're out hunting for Kenny G. And you see all the Charlie Parkers, and then Kenny G suddenly appears. There he is. Who's he emulating now? Oh, it's Dexter Gordon. Bang, 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 there. And the bebop notes go tearing off and hit Kenny G, but then he's got that big hair that repels it.
You need your cymbal and throw the cymbal.
Oh yeah, but if I do that, then I will be referencing how Charlie Parker, first made it. You see that would probably be the killer move in this game. I think we're onto something here. But to be serious, this flight of fancy and weirdness, this really sums up the world we're going into. We're talking about details about jazz, but the fact is we're on the cusp. I believe there's a cultural shift happening as we leave this sort of postmodernist world, and a lot of people are talking about this metamodernism now, which is this idea of meaning.
Check it out.
But tied up within a sort of postmodern irony.
I think what's really going to freak us out is when people start getting implants, and we're going to kind of an exoskeleton lifestyle. I think as the environment gets more toxic, we might see people become more enclosed and separated. So they're going to be making music kind of like we are on a Zoom call, but with implants. The kinds of improvisation will be pulling from your subconscious, and people are going to be doing dream improvisations with your dream and your dream and your dream. I don't know, man. That could be that's some pretty meta weird stuff that's going to happen, like uncontrolled improvisation. Because when you put that chip in your brain and connect with someone else, what are they going to find when they start digging around your brains and you open up your improv centers? That could be something.
I'm 55. I am finding. Don't worry, Paige. What I'm going to set up another page. I'm going to another Zoom, and when we come on, you will all talk. Me and Ben will just sit back, and you can say whatever you want. Me and Ben will have a cup of tea, and we'll carry on working on our virtual jazz.
We're going to come out with trombones.
Yeah.
I have one question. If we're all so happy about what's going on, why are we here? Why are we so worried? I mean, the reason this whole thing is going on is because we're talking about the crazy or the bad stuff. And I hate to break it to you, but it's going to take ages until this kind of a dream would be a reality, because the technology is really going down at the moment. Okay, it looks like it's going up, but there are so many things going on around the world that we're like almost on the verge of a technological breakdown or some kind of thing. And like the wars between China and the US and stuff like that. There's not going to be chips, maybe, for making any, or there's not going to be people to make the development. The development of the technology that we're talking about is so complicated. People have to be engineers. I mean, I'm afraid that in 20 years, the engineers won't be that good.
But the thing is, I'm not scared of China because I'll kill him with my jazz horn. Oh, no, that wasn't real. I'm getting confused now.
what I'm saying is just that I'm concerned because of the quality of the music. And we're sitting here and talking about really great stuff that are going on. So why are we worried? And I think we are worried. And it's like we're trying to cover what's really going on. And we have to push this kind of new thing that we want to happen forward, because it looks like it's not really happening at the amount that we're talking about. I mean, the whole thing about asking, is jazz dead? Is jazz really going to change so much that our kids are not going to even be sort of know about it? And I'm not just talking
So
about
what you're
jazz, I'm talking
saying,
about
Doran,
rock and everything.
we've got like a few seconds left. I'm going to stop it.
Yeah.
I will stick. Where can I?
I just want to poke
It's
this
going to have to go
idea.
into the link's going to have to go back into Patreon, so I'll stick it in there and I'll send it to you, Ben, and then we'll get into another chat. We'll open it
We
up.
could have a
I
part
think what we
two
should
with
talk
this.
about is, what are we actually worried about? I think that's a
Exactly.
really good topic. What are we
Well,
worried about?
the musicians getting paid is one, and
Yeah.
and they're not getting paid. So
That's it.
so that
And I think
ties
we
in.
can identify that on the next video. But I really do want the patrons to kick in and say something. And I can't believe 40 minutes has gone, but that was like amazing. Right, I'm going to switch off now, and we'll see you in part 2. Right, so stop recording. So part 2. What are we all worried about? So patrons, shall we? I'm going to be fair and go from my left to right. It's probably not yours. So, Kid, what are you worried about in terms of the future of music, especially regarding improvised music and jazz?
Well, yeah, so I've actually got to jump off in a few minutes, so I'm glad you chose me first. But so the thing is, I'm not really worried. I think I've mentioned this before, but I think there's been I think we're looking in the wrong direction. I think from my perspective, jazz was originally about looking forward, and I think you have a history of musicians learning from other musicians around them, and then at some point things switched to where now the way to learn about jazz is to look into the far past.
Very good point.
And I think
very good point that is.
And I think there was a split where the people, if you really look at what jazz is at its core and the meaning of jazz, people who were improvising and looking forward went in a completely different direction. So we're looking for jazz among what is aesthetically considered to be jazz, which is, a dude with an upright bass and acoustic instruments and horns. But the jazz guys went off and they're making experimental electronic music, and they're improvising at synth meetups, and they're playing ambient music or lute-based stuff. And so I think we have to expand the context of what we're looking at a little bit and say, jazz is still going on, but we've been looking over in the corner where the jazz guys are supposed to be, and we're missing the breadth of improvised music that's been going on this whole time.
But all the way through the history of jazz musicians didn't like the term jazz, and they thought it was like a sort of corporate white, Western label that was put on it to stop it from being what it could be. So I think that is a very important point that comes out of this that we can grab from that. What about you, Doran? You're next on the list. What are you frightened of? It was the Chinese, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I was just on a tangent. Yeah. So I agree with Kid. It's not that I'm worried about. I think it's how we perceive jazz, and again, it comes to that point where jazz is a movement, just like Kid says, going forward, and we feel as if it's not moving forward in the last 40 years, right? I mean, this is what really this is why we ask who killed jazz. I mean, and when and how and and all of that. And I just I think it's a little tougher because we're still not happy with what's going on, and this is sort of where do we look? So yeah, there are a few bands and there are a few things that are going on which are really excellent, and but it's like we are waiting for something to happen, which is not happening. Like we think like jazz is going to come back and become like dance music, and then it's going to get sophisticated, and we're like going to go through that 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s all over again, but like in a different style or in a different, I mean, every style has to go through this life cycle. It starts as something very functional, like a ritual or a dance, and then it becomes very popular, and then people become very snobbish about it. So they get it more and more sophisticated, and it goes like into that sophistication, and then it saturates, and it's a swing, right? It's a pendulum. So I'm trying to understand, are we on the edge, or are we like, I mean, where are we in this cycle?
Well, we could well be at a point where what we're really spotting is the move from music made by humans to not made by humans. That could be the real shock. I discovered a band today called Thank You Scientist, and they're amazing. The only problem was it's so produced, it's really hard to hear. I think Martin Miller's trying to come into the discussion, but he's gone now. And Martin's a brilliant example of someone who has created a career online without the labels. He's got a ton of subscribers, but he's gone anyway. That was like tantalizing, wasn't it? What about you, Andrew?
I'm not worried about anything at all, my friend. I think, if music remains valid, it will find a way one way or another. And I just don't think that the sort of concern is valid, to be honest. I think there's an element of perhaps sort of, having watched Jazztown last night, I think the overall sort of feeling of that film is kind of one of a loss almost, sort of quite a sad end of an era kind of situation. And I kind of, I do get that, and I think perhaps that is kind of inevitable to some extent, maybe that how that sort of style of jazz and that world, is perhaps coming to an end, or has perhaps ended. I don't really know. That kind of club scene and all of those musicians in compact, and it's not something that I am familiar with. It's not something we really have here in the UK. So I mean, that is sort of, if that's already happened or if it's happening and it's kind of inevitable, that is probably quite a sad loss. But I don't think that, it's an evolutionary thing, isn't it? Things change. Do you think is a, put it into context, do you think when the sort of onset of recording first happened back in the kind of, the early 1900s, was there the same lamenting then over the kind of loss of sort of players on the street, that kind of same grouping? Was there a big sort of hoo-ha amongst musicians working on street corners that, recording music was going to take away all of the spirit of it? And, I don't know, I wasn't about, but, I could imagine there was something similar in line with the sort of lot. And I'm not saying that I don't think it's tragic. It possibly is, but it's the way of the world, isn't it? I think this ties in to some extent with some of the stuff we've been talking about, some of the crazy stuff in the beginning, in the first half of this video, with implants and cybernetics, and how's that going to get developed? Ultimately, I think music has validity and it will find a way through.
It's a force of nature.
So it's all summed up by the last poets when they said, time is moving on, you better get with it before it's gone. Ben, what do you think about those? What's your thoughts on those comments?
I love hearing what everyone said. It really, really some great points made
I've
as a
got good
kid.
patrons. I've got some good patrons here.
I'll try to tie them together. What I heard working backwards from Andrew. Yes, the movie. Thank you for watching it, and thank you for your observations. It was quite sad for me, actually. I don't like to try to market that way or editorialize or predispose someone, but yes, for me it was the passing of an era of a generation, and this ties directly back into what Kid Love's comment about the way the music was made. I learned from the mentors in that movie. I learned from a generation of musicians who didn't go to school. And most of jazz, the history of jazz, young people started living their lives fairly quickly in the sense of having to like make ends meet and having their heart broken and losing jobs and just trying to feed themselves, and that came out in the music. That immediacy and that life, it ties into what Kids said. You didn't have to know the history of jazz to play. Most jazz musicians didn't know very much history. Actually, they knew what they picked up from their hometown. There was no internet, right? They knew what they picked up from the musicians they traveled with on the road, the stories they heard. Yeah, of course there were, and then jazz books started to be written in the, maybe the 30s and the 40s. But the point is it was a focus on, this is what Kid Love was talking about. It was a focus on being present with other people and making music and learning from each other and from our environment, from the sounds around us. I think it was Papa Joe Jones who said back there in the, let's call it the 1920s-ish, the drummers were checking out steam engines and the trains, and the drummers and the tap dancers were getting these rhythms from these bustling metropolises with these loud new machines. Point being is musicians were, and prior to that, Duke Ellington, his band notorious for making animal sounds, plungers and mutes and well, people grew up around in America anyway. We had a lot of cows, pigs, horses, cats, dogs, goats, sheep. Of course, you'd be making animal sounds because you probably grew up with roosters on the roof. But so yeah, the music is being made very different. And if there's a criticism, I have a couple deep concerns. And is it Doran Barnes? I can't get so deep into the engineering end of the earth stuff because that's legitimate concern. I mean, it does play into the psychology of young people too. There is a lot of young people. Well, I don't look forward to having an AI bot show up at my door and terminate me, but the youth especially has a lot of fear of that stuff. But I'm not going to get into that. I'll try to stick with the music. My big concern with the music, a lot of what's great about jazz comes from the freedom and the joy of breaking away from oppression. And this is a little deep because oppression is not is not only felt by Black Americans or descendants of slave. Everyone has oppression, and you go back far enough in our lineage, we know this. One of my concerns is that the academic world is perpetuating what's more and more to me looking like a conspiracy. I've called it a blackwashing. It's an unforgivable omission of the numerous and underrepresented voices of the cultures that were at least blending in New Orleans at the time. We have Native Americans, Mexicans, Spanish, the Creole. We have this tremendous. The culture was had layers like an onion. There were so many different people. But what's happening, what I noticed when I was collecting interviews, I'm going to tie this in kind of to what Kid said and some other things here. The concern about the music remaining valid, as one of, I think Andrew used the term, the validity of the music. without fail, almost every musician I interviewed who had gone through the university system would at some point, whether they were white or black or any color in between, would take a moment to make it very clear that they understood jazz was a Black American music. Jazz was invented by African Americans. Jazz comes from the Black culture. It was almost like, it wasn't virtue signaling. It was sort of almost like an apology or a qualification. It's almost as if musicians who weren't African American had to sort of make this acknowledgement that they were being gracefully admitted entrance into the world of jazz. Okay, big problem on so many levels. The history just being one of it. The primary concern is that these people are now coming from this kind of position of enslavement. Like, they don't even feel like they have full permission. So what they have to do now, they do these mental gymnastics to find where in their past they can claim a sort of legitimate stake in being able to make the music. Otherwise they face being accused of appropriation. So this whole thing it's BS, and it's crushing the spirit. In an ironic way, though, it's creating a kind of oppression that these people are going to have to break again. And Andrew, in terms of the question of where is it going, where are we in the cycle, it's a perverted sort of re-enslavement of white people, let's say. I hate using colored words because, right, scientifically, black is the absence of all color, white is the presence of all colors. How can we're all colored people, but
it's
those
reversed
terms
in
are
RGB. RGB and CMYK are reversed in, like, the black is not all.
It's optical,
or like printing. On print, if you take all the colors, it's black, and if you take out all the colors, it's white. Only in digital RGB is all the combination of all the colors becoming white, and the emission of everything is black. So it's reversed.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that makes sense for digital film. But that's what I mean. Those terms are not. So it's sort of this reintroduced racism, a racial divide. And we see that economically, the forces that be are trying to sever people, pit people economically in caste. And the momentum of jazz music, without any contrivance on the part of the people making it, became so inclusive. I never once had. I was raised by white and black, if you will, jazz mentors, and we never talked about race. It was about music. You either showed up with your heart set to play the music and a mind open to learning, and you're in. And we're colorblind at that point. It's just, are you playing the song right? Are you playing in 2 or are you playing in 4? I mean, but
is your heart in the right place?
Yes. If your heart's in there, but what's happened now is because of this omission of the reality, but the genesis of jazz came from, for example, the Lorenzo Tio and his brother came to New Orleans from Mexico. They were Mexican woodwind players, clarinetists. They stayed behind in New Orleans. They came over for the World Industrial Cotton Exposition in 1884 and 85. They stayed, and Lorenzo Tio's son, Junior, taught Sidney Bechet. So we have a Mexican teaching a Creole who became a founder of jazz. And that's just one instance. Baby Dodds, the drummer, probably one of the earliest jazz drummers. His grandfather was a Native American Indian and used to would play drums in the piney woods, Lake Pontchartrain.
Jazz is not a black art form. It's an American art form.
But here, Andy, at the Manhattan School of Music, at the Berklee College, at the highest level of institutes here, even the deans of music at those colleges are perpetuating that phrase. And what's happening, I fear, is we're creating another violent subdivision of racial potential social conflict.
I totally agree. And it's really weird that if I start to say this, everyone agrees with me. You'll see the comments on YouTube again. You are right, Andy, that we shouldn't be doing that. And it's always like there's this thing that you have to, you've got to not act like that. You can't talk about the blindness. You can't talk about treating everybody.
But you understand it's a reaction.
Some sort of reparation that's got to happen.
But
and if you start talking like that, you're a racist, even though you're trying to promote judging everybody the same. It's ever so bizarre. And another thing I want to bring in is the jazz. A lot of the source of jazz came from Creole musicians forming orchestras in New Orleans after the Civil War. After the Civil War in New Orleans, there was actually a period where there's a lot of mixing, and before Jim Crow came in, and orchestras were formed, and so you had Creole musicians pulling in a whole area of folk music and then getting trained classically. This is why there's all that virtuosity on trumpets and clarinets, and all that there is coming from the classical tradition coming through those Creole orchestras. Now, if you watch I got that from the Ken Burns documentary. They explain that really well. But then as that documentary goes on, you will notice that every time they talk about a white jazz musician, they really push this idea that they had got their sound from black musicians.
But isn't it a reaction?
It's much more crossing over, where they're talking about Paul Whiteman, Bix Beiderbecke, Dave Brubeck. You watch that documentary every single time. It's about their paying homage, and it would be fine if they did that for every musician, because every musician is paying homage to certain other musicians.
Well, and here's the thing, Andy, about that, and I know Doran's trying to say something. When we talk about white, that's a whole nother thing, because there's Irish and Italian and English, and they all saw themselves as not white. But even if you were to say, yes, a white man went uptown New Orleans and listened to the blacks and picked up their sound, at that time, the blacks weren't black. If you define black as being African, they were already fully integrated through interracial marriage over 300 or 400 years with the Native American Indians. And the Native American Indians, slave owners, kept terrible records, personnel records, property records. And when they did, they would look at a Native American and just call them black. So census records, I guess. So that word is used to encompass, and the Creoles, remember, are French and Spanish.
Yeah, and they see themselves as a separate culture. And if you'd have called them black, they would have go, we're not black. I actually don't think anybody called anybody black. I think it was a completely different mindset at that point. My mom's Indian. When she came to the UK in 1946, she was classed as black. And people would say, they would call her like the N-word, and she was classed as black. She also got accused of being Native American.
Right.
Well.
The point here, I want to get back to the main point is it's fantastically complex. Why don't we just talk about it? We're not taking anything away from anyone. We're looking at the truth. And what people can debate all day long, what is jazz? But one of the things it is the truth. Jazz musicians do not tolerate bullshit. And we hear it. We hear it in the first note you play, and you're either true from the heart and it's real, or and it's not. And if it's not, get out of here.
There's a brilliant story that goes with this. There's a comedian in the UK, Andrew will know him, called Roy Castle. And Roy Castle used to host a TV show called Record Breakers. And he was a tap dancer and comedian. And he was famous for playing all these musical instruments, right? Do you remember, Andrew? Roy Castle, right? So Roy Castle, they brought Charlie Mingus over to have an award. And Roy Castle, they decided to get Roy Castle to present the award. So Charlie Mingus comes in and Roy Castle walks and says, I'm going to present this award. And Charlie Mingus goes, who's this guy? And he says, he's a comedian, British comedian. And he goes, I ain't having a prize off no white comedian. Starts having a go about Roy Castle. So while this argument's going on, Roy Castle walked over to a drum kit. Right, he walks over to a drum kit and starts playing the drums, and Charlie Mingus just turned around and said, "That ain't no comedian. That's a jazz musician." what's coming out of this discussion for me, and I'm getting really pumped up about it.
That's great.
Is what's really important is musicians getting together and playing. I think that's what it is. The community of actually forget the music business, forget all that stuff, right? Just get together and play. That's what we've got to remember, because I think Andrew said something in the first half. He said, what changed when the industry came out? And what happened is all the people that would sit around the piano and have a sing song, or they go down the pub and play, that diminished, and people started to have music in their living room. And you've got an era of the music business. Now what's happened is it's moved over to the internet, and the internet actually gives you a great way of getting your music out there and meeting other people. Now, lurking in the background of this discussion is one of the greatest guitarists in the world, in my opinion, which is Martin Miller. He hasn't got his microphone on and he hasn't got his camera on because he is a YouTube superstar. But I do believe Martin is one of the great guitarists on the planet at the moment, right? Now, I went to see him play. I hope he switches his camera on and just comes in, at least says a little bit about this, because I went to see him play the other day. Now, everyone knows Martin. Here he is. He's putting his camera on. He's going to switch his mic. There he is. So I went to see Martin play with Tom Quayle. And it was a guitar masterclass. There was a ton of people in there. They were all watching it. And Martin and Tom played some of the most sublime music I have ever heard. And it went beyond what he does on YouTube. It goes beyond what you do on a record. They just started improvising, right? And I wasn't listening to it from a technical point of view. I was listening to these two musicians that were really symbiotic, playing just beautiful music, you know. So what I'd like to bring Martin in is, how does he feel about this? Listen to this conversation as someone who's not classed as a jazz musician. This was high jazz, I heard. It was high jazz. The whole gig was jazz. You know, I don't think he wants to maybe get associated with the jazz word, and don't think Jazz World wants to go near a guitarist like Martin. It's a whole thing coming here. But I just wanted to say that, you know, it was absolutely incredible, Martin. It was brilliant. So how do you feel about this, you know, about being able to just get out and play, and the restrictions you have working in the modern world outside the old music industry, but you plying your trade on YouTube? Because you've really made a name for yourself by getting in a room and playing with your mates, haven't you?
Yeah, that's kind of my core trademark as of now. Well, to be fair, we do that on YouTube as well. Tom and I, we do play guitar duets on YouTube. We just filmed a set of videos. And I think what reels people in, surprisingly, is not the fact that it's two guitars with kind of a jazz aesthetic surrounding it. It's the choice of music. It's whenever we play something that is not considered like core material of jazz. Like if we did a couple of videos playing tunes like Falling Grace by Steve Swallow, and those tend to be very niche. Barely anybody watches them. But as soon as we play something like Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder, people are open-minded to the idea of checking out two guitarists who improvise playing that kind of music, because there's some sort of hook that people can latch onto, because they're familiar with
you know what that is, Martin? That's called jazz. That's what they used to actually do in the old days.
Yeah, but it's like, especially like in the college world, the repertoire hasn't been updated, right?
Yeah,
it's been the same since the 50s, and I think that's kind of a big core of the problem. And it's kind of funny because Tom Quayle, my colleague, is much more militant about. He's much more adept in jazz than I, and he's much more militant about it. Like I overheard you having that conversation with him, that he's really jealous of people who can play traditional jazz really well. And it's kind of funny to me, because in a way I find him way more impressive than those guys.
To me as well. But I got to say, and I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that I've been able to follow up the interview with you. But it really, because I was sat there and I was taken away. And it reminded me of what music actually is. That when you first played, I was going, God, they got some chops, and God, look at Tom's legato. That's what you do, isn't it, when you go to a guitar masterclass? And then suddenly I had my eyes closed and I was just being taken off. And it was the journey of you two, like, having a conversation with each other. And it was actually little, you were pulling it down. It was under control. It was what I love about music. And I thought, it's a shame. How do we get this out here? How do you get that out there? And like you said, I'll try and get it on the channel when those videos come out. If you can stick a few across. But and your version of How Insensitive was absolutely beautiful. I mean, this idea of you know, you breathe life into that because of the relationship you've got with Tom, and two different really different players. I could feel that you are more, even though you know all your stuff, you're more of an ear player, aren't you? You've got more blues in there, and you're more of an ear player. And Tom's got a lot of structure, and I mean, you both got insane harmonic knowledge, but Tom really is exploring it from that angle, and that like, those two things together were beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
You talk about the spectrum of viscerality and order a lot, right? Or of order and chaos, and Tom would be more on the order side. I would be a little bit more on the chaos side. Depends on what kind of aesthetic you compare it to, because compared to a blues player like Eric Gales, I'm extremely orderful and he's extremely chaotic. But if you have Tom and me on the same stage, I guess I represent the chaotic spectrum.
And do you feel like you go towards that area more as well when you're playing? Because I noticed you were like doing like notes behind the neck and hitting all sorts of weird sounds, and you know, tremolo arm, you know, all that bit.
I feel like it's, for me, it's a bit of an outlet. It's the type of let's say it's the type of aesthetic I don't get to pursue when I do my own music, which is progressive rock. That has a more perfectionist character to it. And with the duo stuff, you know, no clicks, no frills, no edits. It's just what it is in that moment. That's what you put out there. I'm very grateful that I get to do both. Because I like my prog rock to be quite tight and quite perfect, and I like
I do as well.
To be a little bit loose.
But not too perfect. Yeah. So has anyone got any questions for Martin or Ben maybe in the last 10 minutes, or any comments they want to say?
Well, yeah, I'd love to hear from Martin about how what kind of music he listened to growing up that brought him to this. You know, what were the guitarists you heard, and did jazz play any role in that?
So I'm a rock kid. And I grew up listening to Pink Floyd, Rolling Stones, Nirvana, then got into Metallica. I talked to this about Andy. Pretty much any guitar player who decides to get really deep into music was lured into that rabbit hole through heavy guitar music. For me, it was Metallica. Then I got into Dream Theater. That was my first introduction to progressive music outside of Genesis, Pink Floyd, etc., the 70s prog. And then I started going to conservatory, where I was introduced to jazz on an educational level. And that was my first introduction to jazz. It was not through listening to jazz, but it was through the jazz education. And yeah, I kind of reverse engineered my way through it. So at the time, I really didn't enjoy it because I didn't know what I was playing and what I was listening to and what I was supposed to be listening to, right? What I was supposed to compare it to, etc. So I then discovered through recommendation Mike Stern, and there was so much of what I already knew in Mike Stern's playing that finally everything else in jazz started making sense. It was kind of reframing what I had already known, because he was using all these tools and structures from jazz, but he was doing it within a rock aesthetic, and that was really appealing to me. From there on, got into Pat Metheny, and to him I could relate so well because his writing is very similar to progressive rock at times, especially in the group scenario. And suddenly I realized so many elements were similar to that as well. And then that opens up the world to Michael Brecker, and that opens up the world to John Coltrane, and that opens up the world. So I was completely reverse engineering my way into it.
That's not unusual.
The thing is that this is why jazz is important, because you know that it's such a big influence on Martin. It's been such a big influence on me. When I interview Matthew Tavares tomorrow, I know that his favorite artist is John Coltrane, even though he's like producing Kendrick Lamar and all these ridiculous acts. That stuff's still there. We're coming up to the last 5 minutes. I just want to say that one of the things that's lovely for me it's a bit off topic, is doing the YouTube channel. I've been able to make contact with so many amazing people, like you lovely patrons there, but also Ben, who's become a good friend of mine, and we chat about all sorts of things, crack jokes, and also Martin, which I hope I can also call Martin a good friend of mine, and to be able to get Ben and Martin together. And this is what's coming out of this. Music's about community, isn't it? And it's the industry is the one that messes it all up in the end, isn't it? That's the bottom line.
And social media.
If we could all focus on that, all focus on just, communicating and getting together and playing, and you guys playing, getting your music out. There's quite a simple answer, really, and don't worry what it's called. I think I've been on this long journey since my video went viral. And it's been incredible. And again, it's the music has reached out through YouTube. My love of all this music has reached out. When I'm sat there talking to like Jason Marsalis, and then he messaged me afterwards. I said, can you say hi to your brothers? And everything I've done is done with respect. He goes, yeah, I'm going to go and see him now, and I'm going to say hello to them. And I was like, wow, this is bonkers, So it's an incredible thing, and it still is, and it always will be. Won't it? It always will be. Is any of you patrons want to ask Martin something while he's here? He's a patron. He's not here as a guest. He's just a run-of-the-mill patron here. I got superstar patrons, I have.
I've spent a lot more money on far worse things, trust me.
Like guitars. And
yeah,
cameras.
a bunch of them. Yeah.
Guitars and cameras and rehearsal rooms. Has anyone got anything they want to ask Martin while he's here?
I'll jump in. Honoured.
Are you honoured? Are you a fan, Andrew? Are you a fan?
Yeah. I discovered Martin from being an Andy Edwards patron, so you've got to thank for that, Martin.
I'm the conduit.
I love your album, mate. It's superb. Is that fantastic piece of work? Listen to mine. You'll have to find it on here. And
Yeah.
and you also,
Put a link
thank
in
you
the chat.
so much
check
for
it out.
joining.
Yeah,
Put a link in the chat.
Just quickly, how are you finding your money from your streams? I don't know what kind of numbers you're hitting, Martin. Is it sad? Over to you.
It's not what it should be, right? I think it's extremely. It's at the core of my business is to diversify as much as I can. So I have all kinds of income streams. Not a single one of them is strong enough to sustain my living on its own. But since I have like 8 to 10 different income streams, I do make a living from that. So I like this year alone, I've released a book, I've released a new album, I've released a new signature guitar. That was all within the span of 3 months. I went on tour just now. I'm gonna go on tour again in October. So yeah, I'm trying to diversify as much as I can, so that I'm not dependent on one single income stream, because streaming is surely not it. It's one of the smaller ones.
Martin, maintaining those income streams and wearing so many hats, is it frustrating to you as a musician that X percentage of your time has to be spent maintaining these business ventures?
That is one of the biggest problems I struggle with. Honestly, I talk to my wife about this all the time, is that I actually have to make money to be able to afford to be creative. The creative side of this is my hobby, and anything else is the job. But I do spend money on being creative. Like that's some luxury I afford myself after having made X amount of money. Like I want to really write a new record. I just can't. I have so many contracts and things to fulfill at the minute that I just cannot sit down and just write a piece of music, even though I'm dying to do so. But
then I think all the way through this, and Ben brought this up. Martin, would you and Ben, because Ben has got some incredible insights into being a jazz musician, what's that like to make money, and you're this new breed that's making money through all these new ways like YouTube and doing all these weird things and selling courses and all that and writing books and all that type. Would you be up for doing one, in a month or so and coming in and chatting about how musicians make money? That would be, and Ben, are you up for that? And you guys up for that?
Absolutely. I can be the guy that says how musicians don't make money.
Yeah, I'm me.
I'd love to.
Me and Ben will represent being, rubbish musicians, and Martin, you can represent being a good one.
That would be great. Hey, before the clock ticks out, I want to remind everyone, going back to the whole future of jazz.
1 minute.
1 minute. Keep in mind, both Wynton Marsalis and Herbie Hancock hated jazz when they were young. This goes back to Martin getting it. Martin never said he hated it, but the way people get in through various back doors. Herbie Hancock hated it. He was a classical guy. Wynton Marsalis was a funk guy. He was listening to James Brown. They hated jazz and became innovators, leaders. So that again makes it confusing as to how we will find the future of jazz.
Before we go, now we've got quite a few people. If I count you down, will you all wave and say bye? And I want to hear all the voices at the same time. I know I am immature. You know I'm immature because you watch the channel. Will you all be up for doing that? And we'll go,
Sure.
bye-bye, everybody. Okay, after 4. You're all musicians. You should be able to handle this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bye-bye,
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Andy.
Thank you, guys.